This is Changing Denver, the show about our city, how we make it, and how it makes us. I'm Paul Caroli. Back in late 2014, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had a problem. Dalmatian toadflax, musk thistle, knapweed, and other non-native plants were steadily encroaching on the native grasses of the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge. At the same time, the dry native grasses were looking more and more like kindling for a wildfire that could devastate nearby residential communities. Something needed to be done. What they came to was the idea of a controlled burn along the southern boundary of the refuge, near the southwestern corner. Project lead David Lucas secured the necessary permit from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, informed the public through the usual channels, and made the necessary preparations. At any other wildlife refuge, a proposal like this probably wouldn't have even registered with the public. But not every wildlife refuge occupies the land of a former nuclear weapons production plant. Not every wildlife refuge is contaminated with plutonium. And not every wildlife refuge has a small army of activists ready to protest any activity at the refuge they disagree with, which, given their view of the risks posed by plutonium, is basically every activity at the refuge. The general of that army, Leroy Moore, is a Rocky Flats veteran with decades of proverbial battle scars. Through the production years, the cleanup years, and the post-cleanup years, he and his comrades developed numerous strategies for approaching these types of conflicts. To stop the controlled burn, they revisited one with a history of mixed results.
Rocky Flats burn, a bad idea. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service,
on November 21st, 2014, Leroy published an op-ed in the Boulder Daily Camera outlining the problems he saw with the controlled burn.
This plan should be canceled.
He described the threat plutonium poses to human health and argued that the burn would unnecessarily expose the residents of nearby housing developments.
Manufacturing operations that released plutonium have ended, but much plutonium remains in the environment. In conclusion, please go to petitions.moveon.org and sign the petition urging the Fish and Wildlife Service to cancel the planned burn. Second, I invite fish and wildlife personnel to meet to discuss what to do regarding invasive plants at the refuge.
As that petition racked up more than 2,000 signatures, Leroy and some of the other scientist leaders of the activist community followed up on his offer to meet with David Lucas. Emails went back and forth, and they all agreed to sit down in person to discuss it on January 29th. What happened next has been disputed. Fortunately, a source forwarded me the full email exchange, so we know exactly how it played out. What you're about to hear are excerpts of that exchange, condensed, but otherwise unaltered.
January 11th, 2015. Hello, David. Regarding the January 29th meeting, rather than 12 or so of us coming to the Arsenal, we invite you and your colleagues to meet with us at the Homewood Suites Hilton Hotel at 4950 Baseline Road, Boulder. We have high hopes for being able to work with you in finding a better alternative than a burn for dealing with invasive vegetation at the refuge. Something safer, but also less expensive. Best, Leroy. January 20th, 2015. Leroy, I was asked to make sure that no media will be at this event, correct? Thanks, David. January 23rd, 2015. David, I stated previously that the group convening this meeting with you includes chemist Ann Finnerty, biologist Harvey Nichols, meteorologist W. Gale Biggs, water specialist Mary Harlow, former attending, other than those listed above, will be a few elected officials, an attorney or two, a physician, and community leaders, all of whom are concerned about the proposed burn. A few journalists also will be there. Yours truly, Leroy. January 29th, 2015. Leroy, from the beginning, we asked that media not be at this event. There are plenty of opportunities for media elsewhere, and that was never the intention of this meeting. Again, if media is at the event, we will have to decline and drive home. If you plan to continue with that, let us know and save us the trip. Thanks, David. David, in response to your email today, I talked to Leroy and he asked me to write to you. The media presence is non-negotiable, for reporters already know about this meeting and we cannot bar them from it, nor would we wish to. This is, after all, our meeting, to which we invited you. And if you refuse to attend and make your position fully transparent, then that will be publicly noted. Sincerely, Harvey Nichols. Harvey, I don't like to say he said, she said, but I will send you all the communications around this meeting. We said multiple times, no media at this event. You have ample time to address this, and you have options. David Lucas. David, I have just learned of this Fish and Wildlife Service policy statement on public relations. It reads as follows. Quote, the service supports a culture of openness with the news media and the public that values the free exchange of ideas, data, and information, and that provides for the dissemination of accurate, scientific, scholarly, technical, and management information.
As you may have guessed, the meeting never happened. In the end, the sole remaining citizen oversight body, the Rocky Flats Stewardship Council, came out against the burn. And on February 6, 2015, David Lucas begrudgingly accepted the council's recommendation and indefinitely postponed the burn. 3 years later, he's still unhappy about this, and will explain in detail why these burns are necessary and why this one posed no possible threat. But at the same time, how many of us can claim to be the recipient of a personal thank you from a group of 41 mayors?
February 17th, 2015. Dear Mr. Lucas, we wish to express our appreciation for the decision to postpone controlled burning operations of the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge this spring. We hope that you will see, as we do, that this provides an opportunity to engage the communities near Rocky Flats in an authentic and ongoing dialogue aimed at identifying strategies for managing the refuge in ways that are beneficial to the wildlife and to the residents of the Denver region as well.
When the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service took over the lands that would become the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge, they inherited a toxic relationship with the public, poisoned by decades of broken promises, fear, and distrust. This is the Rocky Flats I came across in late 2016. I didn't understand at first, but as the months passed, the outlines of the problem came into focus. And that's what today's episode is about. Did the 41 mayors get their wish for a more authentic, ongoing dialogue? And what would success or failure mean for all of us? Presented in partnership with the Denver Public Library and the Colorado Independent, Changing Denver presents Unclear Danger, the Colorado story of Rocky Flats. Chapter 3. Sharing and Caring. In the summer of 2016, I signed up for a beginner's Spanish class. It was held in the evenings at the middle school down the street from my apartment, and the other students were mostly people kind of like me, young adults looking for a fun way to meet people and improve themselves. Walking home one night, I was chatting with a classmate about this or that, and she told me that she was volunteering on a health survey at Metro State. Apparently, a professor was looking for as many people as possible to share their health status if they lived downwind of the former nuclear weapons plant just outside Denver. And I had never heard of Rocky Flats at the time, so I was intrigued. Mi amiga invited me to an upcoming screening of a relevant documentary, and on one particularly balmy evening in late August, I made my way to the Oriental Theater in North Denver. It turns out the movie was more focused on John Wayne. In 1956, the Hollywood icon starred in an epic war movie called The Conqueror. He played the title role of Genghis Khan, and they shot all the big battle scenes in the Utah desert.
I share your taste in women, Targetai, but not in blood.
There's a reason you probably haven't heard of it.
Farewell, Tartar woman.
There's also a reason why this is related to Rocky Flats. See, John Wayne died of stomach cancer in 1979, and for many years, rumors swirled that the actual cause of that cancer was exposure to radioactive contaminants on the set of The Conqueror. The set was downwind of the active nuclear weapons testing site in Nevada, and the connection seemed highly plausible, especially to people living in the area who themselves were suffering from various cancers. The documentary laid out a detailed case, with copious slow-motion shots of Wayne falling from his horse into the presumably toxic soil.
Let the guards spread out! As Chief Targetai ordered!
But it mostly sidestepped a greater truth. See, Wayne was a lifelong smoker, and as we all know, smoking has a proven link to cancer. The documentary brought this up, but didn't linger long. Instead, the focus was squarely on the downwinders. They spread the rumors in the first place because they saw something else in John Wayne. He represented their most cherished values: dignity, fortitude, strength. To them, he was an unrivaled American icon, felled by an unrivaled symbol of American hubris.
There are moments for wisdom, Jamuga, then I listen to you. And there are moments for action, then I listen to my blood.
The speculation about the causes of Wayne's cancer may not have been true, but the pain you could see in the faces of the people living downwind of the testing site definitely was, and I was transfixed during the subsequent panel discussion about Colorado's own downwinder community.
The question was, what is the educational outreach to schools and educational institutions on these issues, especially since we're talking about stuff with a half-life of 24,000 years. So I can take a little bit of this.
Afterwards, I made plans to interview the most flamboyant panelist, John Lipsky. He's the former FBI agent who led the dramatic raid on the plant back in 1989, and a real John Wayne type.
This was an extremely extraordinary event. This was not the usual case at all, and I knew that. But I just felt like it was taking too long.
He told me that after he retired from the service and moved back to Colorado a few years ago, he bought a house in Longmont, specifically because it was far away from Rocky Flats.
So are you saying that you're not interested in riding your bike on the trails that they are putting in at Rocky Flats?
Not at all.
Okay.
And in fact, I feel so strongly about it, I have spoken out that other people should reconsider it and get informed at least.
From there, I talked to Kristen Iverson, Leroy Moore, and a few other activists and specialists who are outspoken on the issue. They each had a lot to say about the shameful history of the plant, the observed health problems in downwind communities, and the dangers of plutonium. It was only then, after I'd documented the range of views from the activist community, that I heard about the Fish and Wildlife Service offering tours of the refuge to small groups and members of the media. All right, I am driving right now on the I-70 westbound towards the mountains, and I'm on my way to meet David Lucas. They were kind enough to invite me out. I think they hosted a special tour for me. They had other press people there a few weeks ago, but I called the office enough times that I think they just wanted to get it over with and get rid of me. So I feel a little bit obligated to do a good job, I guess, in this interview, like not feel like a fool, come off as prepared. I wasn't even close to prepared. But other than that, I just really don't want to inhale any plutonium. I've been reading about that, and it seems like bad news. As you'll remember from Chapter 1 of this series, I heard a completely different narrative on that tour. All the questions I had from the activists didn't seem to apply to the situation David Lucas was presenting. And it was on that tour that I first saw how divergent the narratives around this place really were. Rocky Flats was a much bigger story than I initially thought, and I decided to follow along to see what would happen next. All right. Very simple sign. David told me that Fish and Wildlife was just starting a community outreach campaign in the lead up to the opening of the refuge in 2018. And just a few weeks prior, they'd put on a public forum, or sharing session, asking for feedback on some of their plans for the refuge. How did that first sharing session go?
I thought it went pretty well. There were a lot more people than we expected. We got a lot of really great ideas.
So were there any extreme from your perspective opinions expressed, and how do you deal with that?
That's kind of a challenging question. I mean, when you have public meetings and you have public forums, it's unfortunate, but the only people that are able to usually show up are those that have pretty, adamant opinions, one way or the other. They're the ones who take time out of their day to show up. With all of our public input, we accept that, we listen, and we try to, figure out exactly what all that input means and how we put that into the equation to make things better.
First thing when I got home from that tour, I looked up Fish and Wildlife's calendar and saw 3 more sharing sessions scheduled. There was one on the hiking and bike paths, one on the design of a new visitor center, and one last one on a much more controversial and interesting topic: visitor safety. I cleared my schedule, and 6 months later, on May 15th, I drove out to the Arvada Center for the Arts and Humanities. There were a handful of protesters outside holding signs with slogans like, "What you don't know can hurt you," and "Test the soil before you build." There was clearly a lot of interest in this meeting, so I went inside early and found a seat in the front row.
Hey folks. Okay, we're gonna get started. Thank you all for coming. We might have a few folks still coming in, but we want to respect your time and get started. So my name is
Fish and Wildlife hired a facilitator, Mimi Mather, to run the meeting. She laid out the agenda and made a brief and highly revealing plea for order and respect.
We will not tolerate those who disrupt the meeting. We'll ask you kindly to please respect the rules. If you don't, we won't tolerate them, and we'll ask you will be escorted by law enforcement here.
This was the first and, to this day, the only community meeting I've ever attended that came with an implicit threat of arrest. I started to regret missing the previous 2 sharing sessions, but there wasn't much time for that. A familiar figure was stepping up to the mic.
Hi, everyone. Again, thanks for coming tonight. We know everybody's busy, and we know this is important to everybody.
David spoke briefly about the whole sharing session process and summarized the history of the wildlife refuge before getting to the matter at hand.
So, tonight, safety concerns from the refuge perspective related to cleanup. We're confident in the results from the experts. If we didn't believe it was safe, we wouldn't allow our employees to be there, and we wouldn't be here tonight talking about additional visitors, public use opportunities on the refuge.
He outlined how Fish and Wildlife makes risk management decisions and how Rocky Flats fits into that paradigm. He said that 2 years prior, his department had agreed to something he called confirmatory soil sampling.
We will share those results as they become available.
He also touched on their plans for a visitor center that would showcase the various eras in the refuge's history, and asked the crowd for other suggestions of ways his office could engage with them. It seemed like things were going smoothly, but there was a real tension in the air, something I couldn't quite put my finger on.
So with that, I am going to introduce our partners from the regulatory agencies: Scott Sarovchek from the Department of Energy, Carl Spring from the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment, and Vera Moritz from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. These folks have worked on the Rocky Flats sites decades. They are experts, and they do have a great deal of information to share with us tonight. As Mimi said, our rules of engagement this evening are we're going to respect our presenters and listen to them. And then after that, we're going to listen to one another. So we ask that everybody take the time to listen to these folks and their presentation that they've put together for you all tonight.
Sarovchek came up first. He went over the DOE's history with the site and some details of the cleanup.
The D&D work, the decommissioning and decontamination, not a lot of people could see that actually happening. It happened inside the building. So for years it looked like there was very little work going on, when in reality there was a lot of work going on inside the buildings.
He explained how the DOE still maintains 2 covers on old landfills and operates 3 groundwater testing systems. And honestly, it was a bit boring. I know that's bad to say, but his body language was so, well, he seemed disinterested, and I started to lose the thread. My eyes wandered. Oh, there's something on that whiteboard over there. What should I eat for dinner? I stretched my arms, rolled my shoulders, craned my neck to the right,
and then the landfills. It was municipal waste, construction, demolition.
Wrong!
Debris. There was also low-level mix.
Wrong.
Some
behind me was a silent sea of dissent. The activists had printed out and distributed small signs, and every time they heard something they didn't like, they'd hold them all up in unison.
Wrong.
After Sarovchek finished his presentation, Carl Spring of the CDPHE took his turn.
We all here in this room have, based on American Cancer Society statistics, about a 42% chance of contracting cancer in our lifetime. Higher for men and lower for women. But the average.
It was the same thing again. The activists had obviously heard all of this before, and they didn't agree with any of it, and they weren't interested in hearing it again. It didn't matter if he was talking about the estimated excess cancer risk for a visitor, or plutonium contamination in the refuge. The highest recorded level is about 20 picocuries per gram, by the way.
That level of activity equates to about 2 times 2 in a million risk of excess cancer.
Wrong.
The very highest number we have in the refuge is at the very, very low end of the acceptable risk range.
Wrong.
This continued through the final presentation from the EPA's Rocky Flats coordinator, Vera Moritz. And then Mimi Mather tried to come back up and segue the session, not into a Q&A like you might expect, but into something they were calling an open house. I think they wanted people to come up and pose questions to David, Carl, Scott, and Vera one-on-one.
I do recognize that there are a number of activists in the room.
That didn't happen.
You guys, if you want to sort of take over this corner of the room with your posters and signs, and so anybody that's interested in getting your opinion knows where to find you. And at the same time, I'm going to ask Vera, excuse me, I'm going to ask our experts.
Dog and pony show. Where is the fact? Why isn't anybody talking about the fires that happened on the site? Why isn't anybody talking about
Miss, can you please, I'd like you to come over here. Okay, we're going to break up into the open house. Experts over here. Please come over here and ask.
It quickly devolved into chaos. One woman from the crowd rushed up to take the lectern and share her views, but the mic was shut off. Others crowded around Carl, Scott, Vera, and David. One person saw the mic in my hand, grabbed me by the arm, and guided me over to a poster she had made, showing contamination spreading all the way into Denver. Others were equally eager to get their side of the story out there.
Tell me your name. Michelle Gabrielov Parrish.
Why'd you come here today?
I live in Superior, so I'm right next to where they're going to make the visitor center and where they want to open up some of the trails, which means that when they kick up the dust to construct and to recreate, it's going to blow right to me and my family. I have 3 children at the school that's essentially across the street from there, and then we live just a few blocks down.
There was clearly a lot of pressure building up over the course of these sharing sessions. And the way they ended with unsatisfactory answers pushed it over the top.
I noticed at the end you wanted to ask some questions. What questions did you want to ask?
The first one that came up is they said that they cleaned it up, and I want to know, how do you clean plutonium? Because everywhere else I've seen, no one has an answer for how you clean up radioactive waste. So I wonder how they did that.
Everyone I talked to had very pointed questions like that. Why wasn't there any testing done after the 2013 floods? Why aren't you listening to Leroy Moore? Don't you understand we're dealing with plutonium?
So how do you think that went?
I think it was another successful meeting. There's individuals that we've heard from several times, and they might not be happy. But the way I couch this You might not disagree with some of our decisions, but there's not a person in this room that can say they're not well informed after these sharing sessions.
I'm not sure that's true. I feel like everyone has a lot of questions about like what it took to. I don't know. There people were talking about a panel. I'm not sure that open house is a popular decision.
Open house is number one. I think you and I have talked about this. This is not a decision-making process that we're in tonight. This is an informing the public process that we're in tonight. We're soliciting feedback in a lot of different ways. And I think an open house format is a lot more conducive to having discussions. I've had some great discussions after these meetings with individuals on both sides.
One of the activists I'd spoken to earlier came up and stood beside me while I was talking to David. So I figured, I haven't heard what one of those productive conversations sounds like, so let's give that a shot.
Sure. I'm wondering why Fish and Wildlife is so determined to do this when the community is so concerned. Can we do some lag time? Can we wait a little bit before you go forward? And I also want you to know part of our concern has been for the wildlife workers, but I also live in Superior and Rock Creek. So even if I choose not to go out there, I could be getting the particles that you all kick up when you're building the trails and the visitor center. So I just don't understand when we have so many beautiful places in Colorado, why you're choosing one of the most controversial ones that worries the community to such heightened levels.
All right. Well, I mean, now that this is like a soundbite, it's not necessarily as much of an honest discussion, but
I'm not gonna cut it.
But no, I mean, honestly, as I stated, number one, I have a law to implement. Which is the Rocky Flats Act of 2001. That's what governs what I do on all my different places. After that, I guess I would disagree with you that there's so much community, because there is an awful lot of community that supports this decision.
Is really supportive?
Oh yeah. There's tons of people that I hear from. I'm not going to name them name by one, but I mean, we have residents that live nearby. We have people that are interested in regional trail connectivity. We have wildlife enthusiasts. We have a lot of people that are interested in exploring the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge. So I do hear...
and they all live around there?
A lot of the neighbors do, for sure. But we do hear your concern, which is why we've kind of been having these discussions, and we're going to continue to have discussions.
In one way, we really appreciate it. I made a lot of effort to make it here tonight. I had to arrange stuff with my kids, with my work, to leave early, all these things. So I appreciate that you want feedback, but at the same time, it doesn't seem like you do want feedback. You're not answering questions that the public is asking, and at the other sharing sessions, you said we can't speak. So it feels like it's not a sharing session. It's
I would contest that you cannot speak, because we're having opportunities to speak afterwards, and we're having opportunities for people to draw lines on maps, and we're having opportunities for that. What we have made the decision is that we're not going to take public record hearing notes like a public hearing.
I think this exchange conveys the tenor of the dialogue that night, which was, in my view, not much of a dialogue at all. I saw two sets of people with wildly different ideas about Rocky Flats talking past each other. But real engagement wasn't the only thing absent that night. Remember last episode when we laid out the shape of the activist movement, the shaft and the point of the spear? The activist groups were there, but I didn't see Leroy Moore or Harvey Nichols or any of the other drivers of the alternative narrative in attendance. What were they up to? After this break, and a word from another member of the Denver Podcast Network, we'll check in with them and see what they were doing while the rest of us were sharing.
Hello, everyone. I'm Giles.
I'm Emily. And I'm Michelle.
And we're the Beyond the Trope podcast.
Every week, we delve into topics like pop culture, fiction writing, and other nerdy things.
We feature laid-back conversations, bad puns, and in-depth interviews with authors, comic creators, and more.
Find our show at beyondthetrope.com.
Where's John? Over there. John, you about ready? Yep. Okay. Hi. My name is Randall Weiner. I'm an environmental lawyer. I have the honor of representing 5 organizations that have been working on issues related to plutonium contamination at the Rocky Flats site west of Denver for a combined total of almost 60 years.
2 weeks after the 4th sharing session, I biked down to the courthouse in downtown Denver because I heard about a new lawsuit being filed on behalf of the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center Rocky Flats Right to Know, Candelas Glows, the Rocky Flats Neighborhood Association, and the Environmental Information Network.
On August 10, 2016, the Department of Energy transferred $8.3 million to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for the purpose of constructing a visitor center, a multi-purpose facility on the buffer zone around the highly contaminated, still contaminated, Superfund site, the Central Operating Core. Included in that August 2016 interagency agreement was a Department of Energy timeline for opening up the refuge to the public. Could have been a Fish and Wildlife Service timeline. It was an agreement between the two. That timeline said that the refuge would be opened to the public in the summer of 2018, with a construction date commencing in June 2017. If you go to the Fish and Wildlife Service webpage, like I did last night at 9 p.m., you will see right on the front page that they plan to open the Rocky Flats Refuge to the public in the summer of 2018, right on that Department of Energy timeline. That's why we are filing this motion for a preliminary injunction today, one day before June.
The press conference was very formal and proper and, well, serious. I'm no lawyer, but it seemed to me a real challenge to David Lucas and Fish and Wildlife and the entire official narrative about Rocky Flats. At the same time, the storyteller in me started salivating at the prospect of courtroom battles and dramatic testimonies. Was this the first step to a final confrontation? The unveiling of a government conspiracy? And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of the end of the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge? Alright, so I am sitting here on May 31st. It's a couple hours after that press conference that I think you probably just heard. So, obviously this is a huge development, and I know exactly where I've got to go from here. I got to figure out what the people at Fish and Wildlife think. I assume that they're probably scrambling in the office to deal with this. The lawyers are certainly involved. I just sent an email, actually, to the press relations person at Fish and Wildlife. His name is Ryan Mooring. I told him about, I just said, hey, can I get a comment? And the reason why I started recording right now is I got a very interesting response back just a moment ago. Hi, Paul. This is Ryan Mooring writing. Hi, Paul. We have been advised to refer all media inquiries on Rocky Flats to DOJ for the time being. That's the United States Department of Justice. Please feel free to pose your questions to, Win Hornbuckle. win.hornbuckle@usdoj.gov. His phone is... So I emailed Win Hornbuckle, and I called Win Hornbuckle, and I emailed again, and I called again, and again, and again, and again. 3 months later, I got a message from someone else at DOJ with a one-line response, quote, all I can provide is that DOJ declines to comment on the lawsuit, unquote. Not only did they stop talking to me, they stopped talking to everybody, and that left a big space to fill in the public discourse. I suspect this was part of the activist plan, because they quickly filled that vacuum with stories bolstering their narrative. Stories about the second prong of this new campaign. A highly targeted, strategic push on a particularly approachable civic institution, the local school board.
And our first speaker on an agenda item tonight is Dr. Harvey Nichols. Dr. Nichols, good evening. Welcome. Please come to the podium.
Back on March 14th, Harvey Nichols attended a meeting of the Boulder Valley School Board and took a turn during a public comment period.
I'm Dr. Harvey Nichols. I live at Boulder. I'm emeritus professor.
Harvey explained his history with Rocky Flats, the airborne particulate study he did back in the 70s, the years of secrecy he confronted in its wake, and concluded with a call to action.
We need, when we listen to the federal officials assure us that, yes, there's a risk, but it's really only a risk of about 1 in a million. When critically assessed, that comes down, according to them, by the order of 1 in 10,000 for harm out at the site. And then if you think that the radiation standards have always descended, becoming more and more conservative over time, it's likely that what seems safe today may not be safe in the future. So they admit there's a gamble element to this. They say it's safe enough. But when you look critically at what they're saying, if you bring in external independent scientists that are not paid to promote the party line, then you get a different picture. So I ask you not to allow this gamble to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nichols.
After Harvey finished, a retired chemist named Ann Fennerty and a retired air quality meteorologist named Gail Biggs echoed his call. They wanted the board to ban field trips to the wildlife refuge, to take a stand against an overconfident federal government in defense of our children.
Boulder Valley School District RE Resolution Number 17-07, ban of BVSD school-sponsored field trips to the former Rocky Flats nuclear weapons manufacturing facility.
The board deliberated for a bit, mostly about an inconsequential procedural issue.
Other comments, Richard?
I just have a procedural question. It's on the agenda as a study item. Could we vote on it tonight?
We could, if the board, if that's the pleasure of the board, we could do that. We put it on study to follow our process, but there's nothing to prevent us as long as we've had a thorough discussion and board members are satisfied with that.
4 minutes later, board president Sam Fuqua called for a vote.
All right, Laura, could you call the vote?
Belval.
Yes.
Benford.
Yes, thank goodness.
Fuqua.
Yes.
Garcia.
Yes.
Gebhardt. Yes. Marquis. Yes. Myers.
Yes.
Motion passes.
For the activist movement, that's what victory sounds like. Harvey, Ann, and Gail went home happy, and the board seemed pleased as well. A few weeks later, I asked Fuqua if we could talk through the measure for just a little bit longer, and he politely obliged.
Accountability is always one of the top things in our mind. You know, that's the idea that the governing board should make sure we're accountable to the voters and the taxpayers, and in turn make sure that the district is accountable for providing a high quality of education to our 30,000 plus students. And so budget, policy, working with our superintendent are kind of the three main areas.
What was your awareness of Rocky Flats before the issue collided with the school board?
My awareness was pretty high due to the fact that I was the news director at KGNU for 15 years, and I started there in the fall.
Full disclosure, I occasionally conduct interviews for KGNU's afternoon local news show. Longtime listeners of Changing Denver will have heard some of these, with Phil Goodstein, William Way, and Helen Thorpe, among others. KGNU, as I learned through my conversation with Sam Fuqua, has been closely tied with the Rocky Flats story since the early 70s. For decades, the radio station has been a reliable venue for the activists to share their concerns about the plant, the cleanup, and recently, the lingering contamination. Yeah, it's like right in KGNU's wheelhouse.
Exactly.
Activists,
so.
Environmental issues, and also right
in the
road
backyard.
from Boulder,
Exactly.
Fuqua told me that the activists started emailing the board about a possible field trip ban in early 2017. They argued that the cleanup was insufficient, that wildlife at the site had the potential to exacerbate health risks, and that plutonium is scary.
The other argument they made, which resonated with me because I had covered Rocky Flats, was the safety standards in the early years of the plant were kind of lax or a bit of a mystery, and those early years were a bit murky in terms of what materials were on site, how they were disposed of, some uncertainty that because it is such a large site, we can't really know for sure what might be buried out there.
I think Fuqua understood the weight of the board's decision in a way that I hadn't quite grasped yet. He could see that it represented something bigger than what appeared on its face.
And I'll tell you that I generally respect and want to follow the guidance of public health professionals, and so I think this resolution may put us in conflict with some of the statements from EPA, Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment, and I don't like being in conflict with the public health professionals. But in this case, partly due to my history of covering Rocky Flats, and then the uncertainty around what might still be out there, I felt that we needed to err on the side of caution for our students.
But that wasn't the only important thing I took away from my conversation with Fuqua. Did you or any of your peers pursue an independent verification of the activist claims, like a third party?
Right. I asked some of my fellow board members to do their own research if they were concerned. I shared my views, basically what I just shared with you, but the board did not. No, we did not do an independent investigation.
And there's no discussion of that?
No, there was not.
This was a surprise, and it changed my impressions of the activist movement. Maybe there was more to it than just a few thousand followers on social media and a small core of expert leaders. Maybe this was more than just a single spear. A month after Boulder Valley approved a field trip ban, John Lipsky led another small group to a meeting of the St. Vrain School Board and brought home another victory. As summer slipped into fall, the lawsuit was percolating through the court system, and the activists were eager to keep Rocky Flats in the news. I started to hear talk of a rally, a show of force to demonstrate public support for their central goal, keeping Rocky Flats closed to the public. On September 30th, in Denver's Civic Center, Kristen Iverson, John Lipsky, and a number of others took turns getting up in front of the 40 or so attendees to share their stories and make their pleas. When it was his turn, the lawyer, Randall Weiner, offered an update on the lawsuit.
Now, yesterday at 3:04 p.m., the federal district court judge, Judge Arguella, dismissed the lawsuit. But she did it in such a way that she left open the door for my clients and additional groups and individuals to go back into court if the Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't do it right. If they don't
I was of two minds about the rally. On the one side, there weren't a lot of people there, and the lawsuit strategy was not quite as promising or dramatic as it had seemed. On the other hand, one of the speakers announced that Superintendent Pamela Swanson had just ordered a field trip ban for all of Westminster Public Schools. The activists weren't winning every battle, but they were winning.
It has not been an issue here in the district. We've not been approached by it.
I called up the district's chief communications officer, Steve Saunders, to see if he could help me figure out why.
She was aware of the Rocky Flats issue just in general and said, we don't want to put our kids in that kind of a position, that if there are people who think it's risky and the science may still be out, that there's no sense for us to put our kids in any kind of position where we might later regret it or put people, students, parents, might make them nervous, anxious, and it's just not worth it at this point.
Over the course of 2017 and early 2018, I was deep into this project. I was talking about it to everyone who'd listen. And through my work on previous episodes of Changing Denver, that was a lot of people, in a wide array of professions and phases of life. I remember walking through the halls of the Wellington Webb Building in downtown Denver, on my way to interview some public official or other, and the topic of Rocky Flats came up. This person took it as an opportunity to tell me that they would never buy a house in one of those new developments out there. There's just no way it's safe after the fires and all that. Let me give you another example. Just a few weeks ago, I went to a graduation party for one of my wife's cousins. Her family has been living in Colorado for a long time, and when they heard that I was working on a Rocky Flats story, they were eager to talk about it. So-and-so's mom used to work out there, you know? My discussion with her uncle in particular sticks out. We'd talked about politics in the past, and I knew he was pretty conservative, so I was kind of shocked that all he wanted to talk about was Leroy Moore and the activists. What's their next move, you think? Will this lawsuit work? I had been thinking of the activists as a fringe movement, but these interactions showed that wasn't quite right. Leroy Moore and Harvey Nichols and John Lipsky and Kristen Iverson and Ann Fennerty and Gail Biggs weren't so much the tip of a spear as they were the tip of an iceberg. There were a couple hundred, maybe, that attended the protests and the sharing sessions, but that was just activists. All across the Front Range, I think there are thousands and thousands of adherents to their narrative, if not more. And this school board campaign, together with the press over the lawsuit, was bringing them out of the woodwork. By the end of 2017, Adams 12 and Adams 14 had implemented field trip bans as well, bringing the number of districts involved to 5. I decided not to wait for the next domino to fall. A couple of months prior, I had heard that the director of Jefferson County's Public Health Department, Dr. Mark Johnson, was sympathetic to the alternative narrative about Rocky Flats. So I went to ask him directly.
You might have heard that 5 school boards now around the Front Range have decided to bar field trips. I don't think Jefferson County is one.
No, I don't think so.
If the Jefferson County School Board came to you for advice on a decision, what would you tell them?
You know, that's a difficult thing. I do not think it's a great place to be sending kids. Kids have they're more sensitive to exposure to things like radioactive materials. I think that there are other places in Colorado where they could do field trips that would be just as fun for the kids and as educational for the kids. I kind of go along with the thought that Rocky Flats is not a good place to be spending a lot of time, particularly for kids.
Although Rocky Flats is in Jefferson County, Dr. Johnson's department does not have any regulatory role. They don't have anyone on staff that is expert in the relevant issues, and I don't think he sees any way to push back against the DOE, the EPA, and the CDPHE, except, well, through the media, including podcasts like this one.
We should be guardians. We haven't had the ability to be the guardians that I wish we could have been.
The legacy of Rocky Flats extends far beyond the former plant site and the wildlife refuge. It's a vast, multifaceted, interconnected web of damaged relationships, deep-seated prejudices, and hurt feelings. And it's woven into the fabric of our community.
And I do not trust the information that's been given me. And my position is not necessarily that we need to do a whole lot more testing. There's a myriad of studies that have been done out there, but all of them have been interpreted either by DOE or by DOE contractors who I felt were not as independent as they might have been.
Back in the early 50s, the government promised us a fancy new industrial facility and tens of thousands of jobs, and asked in return that we trust their judgment. But then came the fires, the 903 pad, the years and years of environmental crimes, the cancers, the plutonium in our soil. They violated the agreement, and now they're asking us to trust them again. I can't blame people for saying no, especially when there are persuasive activists putting forth highly reasonable questions about the safety of the site. But should we say no? Is this a moment for action?
There are moments for wisdom, Jamuga, then I listen to you. There are moments facts and then I listen to my blood.
I say no. Not yet. I was born 4 months after John Lipsky raided the Rocky Flats plant back in 1989. I wasn't around during the cleanup years. I don't feel betrayed the way those who were do. I have the privilege of coming to this situation without that emotional baggage. So, next time on Unclear Danger, the Colorado story of Rocky Flats, a moment for wisdom. It's time to take on the big question. The question that everyone claims to answer, but no one can agree on. The question that divides us. Is Rocky Flats safe? Changing Denver is a proud member of the Denver Podcast Network. In the shadow of the mountains,
we speak.
Unclear Danger, the Colorado story of Rocky Flats, is being produced in partnership with the Denver Public Library and a Colorado Independent. You too can support the show. Set up a monthly pledge at patreon.com/changingdenver if you're loving the Rocky Flats series and you want more like it. We've got fun rewards for supporters who pledge at least $3 per month, and even more for those who back us with at least $10 per month. Speaking of that, I want to give a huge thanks to Andra Zeppelin, Jeff Reisig, Mark Roxwald, Joel Noble, Jason Peterson, and one generous anonymous donor who may or may not be a blood relative of mine. Thanks also this week to David Lucas, Ryan Mooring, Mimi Mather, Harvey Nichols, Leroy Moore, Mark Johnson, Kristen Iverson, Steve Saunders, and Sam Fuqua. Special thanks as well to Tina Griego and Susan Green of the Colorado Independent, JD Lopez, who voiced the emails you heard at the beginning of the show, and Megan Ariano. Our theme song is Minnow by Felix Fast4ward. The rest of the music in this episode is by Soft and Loathing, Lee Rosevere, and Denver's premier chiptunes artist, Aethernaut. We have links to all their work on our website, changingdenver.com. Chapter 4 of Unclear Danger is coming in about a month. Until then, I'm your host, Paul Caroli.